Is this all your leftover Mishloach Manos?
No, it's the fellows in the other class who brought it in, and
David, I can see you didn't appreciate my changes I gave. Okay.
it wasn't yours. It wasn't yours, but there's a limit to how much you can eat.
Hey, I didn't test it.
Okay, we started to speak about what we're going to start to speak about is the different ways that you can absorb taste. This is a little bit of the basis of the Hachsharat Kelim, which we spoke about. How to kasher vessels depends on how they absorb the taste. So the first thing you have to recognize is that when everything is cold, there's really no absorption of taste. And therefore, you can bring home from the supermarket your bags of milk. Here in Israel, some people still use bags of milk. And bags of cheese, whatever it is.
I always take care about that.
You can put them in the same bag with your chicken or your meat. And if something spills, what do you have to do? You just have to rinse it off. You just have to wash it off. As if you think that any crumbs get on one type of food on the opposite type of food, then you just have to wipe off the crumbs. But what if they're a little bit moist or a little bit oily, of some oily grease from the meat, which is going to get onto your hard cheese? So you've got to clean it off. Some people say that if it has little crevices in it, if there's cracks inside the meat, which is going to get some cheese inside of it, or the opposite, there's cracks inside the cheese, which is going to have the meat getting mixed up in it. So then you've got to make sure to slice off that outer layer, which, if you can't get out the little pieces of cheese from in between the little cracks in the meat, or the opposite, you have to take off the outer layer because you're going to have meat and milk together. And it's really a question of the reality. What actually happens is, does anything get mixed in or not? Sometimes, let's go further. Let's say you have a piece of meat.
Would that fall under the 160th clause, or since it could still be entirely separate and identifiable, would it not?
If it's separate and identifiable, you have to get rid of it. You can't say it only mixes in. It only becomes 1/60th. We go by that's if you have a question of taste. If it's not identifiable. So let's say, for example, you have a cold piece of meat, raw piece of meat, and it falls into your cereal and milk, falls into boiled milk. Technically, the cereal milk is still kosher. Just take out the meat, rinse it off, and you're good to go. The cereal milk is still kosher, and the meat is still kosher as long as you rinse it off. Some people say that it gets more complicated when it's cooked meat. If the meat has already been cooked, you have a piece of corned beef or pastrami, and that falls into your cereal milk, then you have to be more careful because the cooked meat has more potency to it, and somehow the taste will be mixing into the milk even though you don't see it. And so you should be machmir, if possible, that cooked meat, you should, if you have a chunk of pastrami, slice off the outer level. You have to slice off the outer layer of the meat in order that you're sure that there's no milk that has been attached to it. So anything that's cooked, we assume has more crevices in it, and if it has spices on it, that spicy taste will be able to enter the milk more so than if it was just bland, uncooked meat. But on the face of it, the simple law is that if it's all cold, you just rinse it off, and no transfer of taste is affected when you have the mixing of the foods. So just separate them and rinse them off, and you're good to go. Okay? When does it get more complicated? When you're cooking it right? The classic is you're cooking chicken soup and a drop of milk falls into the chicken soup. So then the taste goes into the food. Or we were talking about dishes, but forget about the dishes. Let's say you have a parva soup and you want it to be parva. You have a dish, a soup of lentils or minestrone soup. And then you meant to put in the cheese in your bowl afterwards, but you forgot, and you put the cheese into the pot. That cheese taste is going to affect all of the soup. And all the vegetables in it, everything that's in that soup will have the halacha of being milky. That's called bishul bekli rishon. When the pot is on the fire, it's cooking up, it has the ability and the power to influence all of the food which is in kli rishon. Even if you take that pot off the fire, so it's a little bit of a lower level of heat. If it's still in the original pot, kli rishon, even if it's not al gabei ha'esh, we assume that it usually does have the power to infuse taste into the other food. And it's true, you could ask a non-Jew to come over and taste it. Taste this minestrone soup. Do you taste any cheese in it? And if he says, I don't taste any cheese, it's kosher. Then it's parva. And the truth is you wouldn't even need a goy. If it all is a question of meat and milk is pretty bad even for a Jew. So yeah, you need a goy. You need a goy to come and taste. You taste, but no, if there's no meat and milk, it's parva, right? So just take a Jew who's milchik or doesn't care if he's milchik or not. He could taste it. Do you taste any milk? Okay, it's milky. If it's not, not. But usually that's a little bit of a hard standard. Tasting, is he an expert taster? Some people taste more fine taste. Some people don't taste very well. And so we follow the general rules, which is kli rishon, mevashel, and we'll get into the 160th in just a minute. Moshe, go ahead.
Okay, I got a phenomenally stupid question. You're going to love this.
Thank you.
What if everyone involved in this situation has coronavirus and is experiencing the symptom of loss of taste?
It's not a theoretical question, unfortunately. There's a lot of people in the last 2 years that have lost their sense of taste. And that's another good reason why we don't really apply this taste test. In actual reality, in most cases, we follow this 1/60th rule. And if there's 1/60th, so then all you have to do is take out that piece of cheese that you dropped in by accident. The rest of it will remain parva because there's more than 60 times of that item, and you take out the piece of cheese and the rest of it will remain parva. Even if it's in a kli rishon, if there's 60 times and you take out the original 60 times, that nullifies the taste. It's not considered to be enough taste left in there for you to make the entire pot milchik. Yes, David?
Is it plata on Shabbos? Is that still on the fire, or is that not on the fire?
It's a good question. It's on the fire because there's fire underneath a plata.
What's a lower temperature?
It's a lower temperature and it's covered. It's a covered fire, but it's still considered fire. So the covering or uncovering of the fire is significant when it comes to the laws of Shabbat. Shabbat, we have a rabbinic stricture. We're worried that you might stir up the fire. And they say if you cover over the fire, you're not going to stir it. And so that's why it's significant regarding the laws of Shabbat. But we're not talking about Shabbat now. And it's not a question of whether you're going to stir up the fire or not. The question is whether it's cooking or not.
Right, no, that's what I'm saying. Is it clay, but would that still be clay rishon? So you've cooked up some shon. You put it in another container and put it on that. Is that
it's
still
considered kli rishon al esh.
rishon?
It's called kli rishon if it's the same pot that you cooked it in. Even if you switch it from one fire to another fire, from an uncovered fire to a covered fire, it's still considered to be kli rishon al gabei ha'esh, and it has the power to absorb taste.
What if you pour it out?
To transfer taste.
Are you better off than before Shabbos?
If you poured it into a kli sheni, then we're going to get to that in just a minute. It's a different layer, different level. Yes? Renan.
Let's say I have a parve pot that I cook only steaks parve, right? If falls like or cheese or meat in this pot, it automatically become basari or halal.
Correct.
Yeah?
Yes. Even though the food might not be basari chalavi because there's 60 times more of the parva food to nullify the taste of the milk or the meat, the dish has to be kashrut, or this has to be remaining chalavi because it was used for milky foods. We're not sure that there's 60 times in the width of the pot itself to nullify the taste of the cheese, and so that pot will now become dairy for the rest of its life until you kasher it,
Okay.
and then you can switch it back to being parva if you like.
If I am doing in a basari pot, I follow some milk or meat, or cheese, so this pot is unkosher.
Correct. You have to kasher it.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't use it until you kasher it. You can kasher a pot, but
No.
it becomes not kosher. The food, it depends on the percentages. But the pot, if it's a milky pot, even if it was milk used with milk a year ago, if you use it for fleishik, it absorbed now both taste of milk and taste of meat. It has to be kasher. We don't use pots that have been ever mixed with taste from milk and taste from meat. One second, Yossi, and then I'll take David. Yeah.
Maybe a stupid question, but say, like when we were talking about meat, as long as it's raw and it falls into your bowl of cereal, you just need to take the meat out because it's not really absorbing taste because the meat's not cooked. What if it's like sausages, because sausages has gone through a process.
So that's what he said. If it's been cooked, if it's been processed, there's flavorings to it. The minhag is to be
So
machmir.
as long as it's got the ability to release taste, then it becomes a machloket.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, comes more leaning towards you have to really throw it out. The truth is, it depends. You can also take off the layer, as I said. If it's something which is, the outer layer has some cracks in it, you can slice off the outer layer, and you can get out all. If it's all cold and not processed, even if you say, there's going to be some milk in there, you could wash it, and if washing's not good enough, so slice off the outer layer. But if it's something that has been cooked already, or roasted already, and therefore it has a more powerful taste infused in it, it might be the whole problem for the whole thing. The whole thing has to be thrown out. Yes, Dave.
Question, so if obviously if a drop of milk lands directly in the chon, you're probably okay, it's less than 1/60th, etc.
Correct.
If that same drop though, instead of landing on the chon, hits the inside of the pot, or is that now an issue because now the pot itself is all milchik, and so therefore you might have more than 1/60th in counting the thickness of the pot?
Wow.
No. It's a good question, but the short answer is no. Short answer is no. If there's 1/60th in the food to counter the original drop, that's what matters. But you're right. It's complicated. It is complicated. I also want to add one more thing. We've been talking about kli rishon al gabei esh. It's called the first vessel that's on the fire, and that has the ability to transfer taste, to cause a transfer of taste from one food to another food. Cold foods don't. Kli rishon al esh does. What we didn't talk about is what if you have kli rishon al esh. Sort of David hinted to it, but it's a very low fire, and it's not heated to the standard temperature called yad soledet bo. Yad soledet bo means your hand is recoiling from the heat. What is that temperature? There's a debate exactly how much is considered to be yad soledet bo, but the standard, what did we say once upon a time? We said it was, we talked about it, what the standard yad soledet bo, 45 degrees, I think we said. If it's less than 45 degrees, if it's less than yad soledet bo, if I remember correctly, I have to check it, then there's no transfer of taste. Even if it's a kli rishon al gabei esh. If it's just simmering on a very low flame and it doesn't reach the requisite heat, it's as if it's cold.
Within how many seconds?
So that's another question. One thing we didn't mention, and the other consideration is timing. We've been talking about the transfer of taste that happens instantaneously. One drop in for 1 second of meat into milk, or milk into meat. If it's a boiling hot pot on the fire, the taste is going to transfer. It doesn't matter the duration. But if it's cold, we said there's no transfer of taste no matter what. It's not 100% true. if you leave milky foods in meat, or meat foods in milky foods, for 24 hours, there's a halacha called kavush. Kavush means preservatives. And how do you make pickles? What's that called? To pickle? Pickling? Pickling. So the halacha is pickling, that it absorbs taste even if it's all cold over 24 hours. If it's over 24 hours in the same food, then perhaps it has a halachic status of it's been boiled up in a kli rishon. We're going to learn about that later, but there is usually it's less than 24 hours, and that's why I didn't mention it up till now. We're talking about instantaneous transfer of taste. If it's need boiling hot water, boiling hot temperature, kli rishon gabesh, that's when you're going to have transfer of food, not when it's cold.
Could you use someone's underfloor heating, say, to melt chocolate?
Why not? Melted chocolate's delicious. Would you like some? Here, I have some white chocolate for you. You could melt it any way you like. Oh, you're asking about Shabbat. Oh, we're not talking about the laws of Shabbat now. We're talking about Kashrut. Why not? You can do anything you want to food.
So then if someone has a underfloor heating, do you consider their floor like kli rishon?
Yes, but it's not going to be yad soledet bo. Right? If it's yad soledet bo, you would be burning your toes.
It's possible. It's very possible.
Yeah, you think so? 45 degrees Celsius on the floor. The heat of the floor.
120 degrees Fahrenheit.
It's a question.
It's meant for people to walk on barefoot, right? So if you can walk on it, then obviously your hand is not recoiling from it.
It's a question itself, because the
Asphalt is something else.
The element
He's talking about heated flooring.
But the floor itself isn't getting
Correct.
quite as well.
What we care about is the floor. We care about what's touching the food. If the food is not going to be raised to the temperature of yad soledepo, there's not going to be any transfer of taste. So some heaters, some platos don't reach the 45 degrees ever. So it's not going to be any cooking, even if it's a warm food. It's not boiling hot food. Okay, let's move on. What do you say? Let's keep going. We're learning chapter
Sushi.
35. Sushi's cold.
I know, but you put it. Let's say you take some cold salmon that was designed to be sushi, and you put it on the platter on Shabbos.
It's a problem. If it's gonna cook on Shabbos, it's not pre-cooked.
But it's under 120 degrees. It's cooking. Is that an issue?
No, it's not. It's not asur. There's other problems on Shabbat, but this is not a lesson in the laws of Shabbat. So I'm taking it away from the Shabbat. Laws of Kashrut.
Kashrut, not Shabbat.
If you put milk on your salmon in such a warm dish, it will not be absorbed. The taste will not be absorbed in the entire salmon. Again, if you wash it off, maybe you have to take off the top layer if there's crevices, but the rest of it will not have any milky taste in it. However, if you put it in a pot of boiling hot water, then the entire fish is considered to be filled with milky taste. And it's a milchik fish, which is fine. It's even yummy, but it does have the status of absorbed taste. Now, what about when you pour from the kettle? The kettle is a kli rishon al gabei esh, right? This one just happens to be on an electric fire. But if you have a kettle on, the old kind on a fire, so that's a kli rishon al gabei esh. It's the first vessel which is on the fire. Anything that falls into it is going to absorb whatever taste it has. But when you don't put something into the kettle, but you pour from the kettle onto something else, that's called irui, pouring. We spoke about it in a previous class. And irui, does that boiling hot water have the power to absorb taste, or to have the taste absorbed into the food and go out of the food? So we said, when we were talking about koshering dishes, we said that it has the ability to affect the dish up until the outer layer. So when it comes to a dish, well, you can't really separate the layers. Thank you, David. But when it comes to food, you can separate the letters. Doesn't matter. He can flip the fuse. The circuit breaker. Excuse me. Thanks, David. So the halacha says poured water from a kli rishon has the ability to transfer taste, but not in the entire food item. Only the outer layer will be absorbing taste. So we go back to the outer layer, which we talked about cold foods, which might have some remnants in the crevices. Now we're talking about, not crevices, we're talking about the taste gets infused into the, say, a piece of meat, okay? And you dropped a few drops of milk on it. Cold meat. You dropped a few, some cold milk on it. We said, no problem, rinse it off. Let's say you didn't rinse it off, and then you poured some hot water from a kettle onto that piece of meat and milk, or your fish with milk on it, fish and milk and meat and milk sauce. It's all cold. The fish does not yet become milchiks. But when you pour hot water on it, even though it's not in a first vessel on the fire, it's just receiving boiling hot water from a first vessel, that has the ability to transfer taste to the outer rim. It's called kedei klifa, the amount that can be peeled off. You know, klipa is a husk or shell. So klifa means to peel off. So the amount that it is able to, the amount that you can peel off, there's a little bit of absorption of taste into the outer layer. And so some people say you take off like 2 centimeters or something like that, which is quite a thick outer layer. But it could be thinner than that if you have a natural, like a membrane, if you have like a piece of skin on top of a piece of chicken. So some milk fell onto your piece of chicken. Rinse it off. Before you had a chance to rinse it off, someone, right, you had that, you take your groceries home from the supermarket and you have some raw chicken, and now the bag of milk's broke open or was dripping, and so you got dripping milk on top of chicken, and you put it into your sink because you're going to rinse it off. Now, before you have a chance to rinse it off, somebody takes some pasta, they're boiling up water to boil pasta, and where do you pour it out? You pour it out into the sink. They didn't notice that there was chicken with some milk on it there. What's the halacha? The halacha is that pouring from a kli rishon, like that's where you boiled up your water for your pasta, you're pouring it onto the chicken and milk. It has the ability to effect a transfer of taste. That milky taste is now not only going to be on top of the chicken and you can just rinse it off, it's going to be absorbed into the outer layer of the chicken, which you can do even after you pour the boiling hot water on it, because it's only from pouring. Pouring only affects the transfer of taste into the outer layer. Take off that outer layer. Throw it out. The rest of the chicken is unaffected because pouring only has the ability to infuse taste in the outer layer. Take off the outer layer, you're kosher. The rest of the chicken is meaty. The outer layer is a mix of meat and milk, obviously, because it was poured on. It's called kedei klifa, the amount that can be peeled off.
How does that affect the sink now?
What does it apply to?
We spoke about sinks last week, and there's different types of sinks. But in general, the sink
We
didn't
talk
get
about
it.
cooking in the sink. We talked about cold things in the sink. In this case, we've just done a certain level of cooking in the sink. That's why I'm asking.
The assumption is in most sinks that they do get boiling hot water on them. Sometimes you wash dishes and you have boiling hot water coming out of the tap, which is more than 45 degrees. Sometimes it can happen. In any case, like I said, many times in cooking, we do pour into the sink. So we assume that taste gets infused into the sink. That's why many people have 2 sinks, one for milchik, one for fleishik. But there's room to be lenient because that's not the majority of its use. Many times it will only get taste as a spill off from hitting the chicken or the leftovers, whatever it is, and it's not always mixed up. So we talked about that the sink should be kashrut or used with an insert for the other type. But that goes back to the laws of Kashrut and Kelim.
Would you say
When-
Okay,
when-
I'll take
when-
some
when
questions.
We talked about how spices on Kelim affected the Kelim.
No.
No, I thought we talked about how.
No.
No, we didn't.
Spices on affecting Kelim? No. We talked about cold foods, Dafka. Cold foods, if they're cooked and they have spices in them, then
Right.
there's a chumrah that even though they're
Well,
cold,
that's only a humra.
but even though they're cold, they might have the ability to absorb the cold food because
So,
they're
like,
cooked. You know,
That's my question. So would it matter? So like, let's say I had mixed up a nice mixture of garlic and onions with the chicken. It's sitting there cold, and the milk falls on it.
is
How
it
does that
been
affect
cooked? No, that doesn't affect it at all.
Okay.
Only if it's cooked. Okay, another question. Shehilsh. Of course, finish what's in your mouth. Enjoy the leftovers from Purim. You should still have a little bit of a taste of Purim in your mouth, and keep the joy going.
So,
Somebody, the other students, Mishloach
so
Mana.
what you said about the milk only affecting the chicken with the boiling water poured on top of it, only affecting the later. Does it apply to like the real meat as well?
Yes,
Okay, the chicken.
you can skim off the top layer of the meat. The rest of the meat is still kosher.
Applies to the steak as well.
Yes.
It's a question if it's already been cooked, or as long as it's raw, it's okay.
It doesn't matter. The point is that even if it hasn't been cooked, the taste is going to transfer and enter up until the outer layer.
And does the
Kadei
outer layer
klifa,
vary?
because it's from pouring.
What do you
The
think?
outer layer, how do you define it? It's a little bit more sticky. Whatever layer can be pulled off in one entity, like one unit, that's considered to be a layer.
So how does it apply for a steak?
For a steak,
You probably
There's
cut off
no
the area.
layers.
you cut off about a centimeter. That's what you're supposed to do. I saw somewhere here he said 2 centimeters, and that's what I just want to check for a
I was
second.
once given not for hot water, but I was once given an interesting answer in regards to flavor. It's still cold on cold. They said the person told me wash it off with soap and water. If you're satisfied that you need it, you're not worried about the soap, then you've probably fulfilled the mitzvah of the milk.
For cold
Cold
things.
on cold, not without the heat.
Yeah. Okay. Very
Because-
good. Yeah. Here it says here.
Because if you think that you don't want to eat the soap, so if you
Say it's like a hard-boiled egg, right? And a drop of milk went onto like one area of the egg. You want to keep it pure. Does that mean that whole outer layer, which is like a large majority of the egg, is now it's contaminated? You can only eat yolk. You can only keep the yolk.
The question is only if it's been poured on. Poured on, we have only the outer layer. If it's been cooked up inside, then we assume the taste is infused in the entire egg. So you wouldn't the upper layer wouldn't help you.
I'm saying like you're in a kitchen that's been cooking for like many like people, and they're peeling away at hard-boiled eggs, which are nice and hot, right? Because they're in these pots, they like to do things quick. So and then a drop of milk, if someone was careless, lands on one of the eggs, right? Is that whole egg, that whole white bit, is it all, you have to throw that away?
Only if the egg is so hot that it still has the ability to effect a transfer of taste to the inside. That has to be too hot to touch,
I see.
45 degrees. If it's colder than that, if it's just warm, then rinse it off. Just rinse it off. You don't have to take off any layer, yeah?
Okay, so I may be grabbing at straws here, but so different people have a different threshold for what feels scalding. Like
That's why we usually translate it into a specific.
Employee,
Right.
So used to having hot water spilled on their hands.
As a matter of fact, there's another metaphor in the Talmud used for this. Yad soledet bo is one, that the hand is recoiling from the heat. The other one is, I think it's the Yerushalmi, it says, Kreiso shel tinok nichveit bo.
Oh, to make a baby cry.
Means the belly of a baby would get burned or singed, burned by it. That's a very sensitive belly, right? There's no more sensitive skin than a baby's skin. It's so supple, and so it's more sensitive. And the question is, are these exactly the same temperature or a little bit different? And then there's yad tzoledet bo, which we said the hand recoils, and then there's yad nichavet bo. Nichavet bo means being burned. Your hand might recoil, although even if you don't recoil, it won't get burned. And then there's actually the burning point when your hand actually gets starts to be on fire and be singed. So there's a lot of debate about this, exactly what the precise temperature is, and perhaps there's different levels of heat. But let's keep it simple. We're keeping it simple here, and the standard is 45 degrees is yad tzoledet bo. Anything above that causes a transfer of taste. Anything below that does not. And if you have that 45 degrees, but you're only pouring it out of a kli rishon, it's not actually in the kli rishon, it's going to affect that transfer of taste only into the outer level, the outer layer of the food which you're pouring. Okay, so we'll stop here for today, and we'll continue the laws of kashrut tomorrow. Be'ezrat Hashem. Ruvain's here. We should better stop. We better stop.